So the idea is there is not just one yellow brick road that takes you to social impact, RO1's tenure, pursuit of happiness, and lots of stuff. There are lots of different roads. Here we have another fork in the road, where to submit the early career grant. And we've already heard of some possibilities, RO3, private foundation, R21, RO1, and so forth. What are some of the possibilities? All right, now what I'm going to do is to have two people who are going to do this point-counterpoint. Well, let's just start with Professor Heckel on this one. And the first thing to think about, when you land yourself, whether you're a postdoc or whether you're a new faculty member, one of the most important offices for you to become acquainted with on your campus or institution is something called research and sponsored programs. It may also be called something like Grants Administration Office, Grants Office, something like that. Their job is to help investigators. That's why they're there. And what they'll do is to give you information on finding funding sources. They have lots and lots of databases, and they can give you ideas about where you might get funding. They can help you prepare proposals. They have the software. They can give you guidance on using that software to develop proposals. They can help you to set up an award. So if you do get a grant, they can help you to make sure that everything is underway, that you've got the accounts properly established, that you can draw the money when and where you need it. They can also help you manage an award, the various kinds of issues that have to be solved with regard to personnel, with regard to equipment, and the things that you might not know. And some of these things are kind of arcane because they're lodged in the institutional history of that particular place. So you may not know all of the fine details, all the nuances. They can also help you close out the award when it comes time to do that. So this is a very important agency to be involved with. Now, speaking as Dr. Heckel, NIH provides lots of opportunities for you to get research grant support, starting from your very youngest days, even while you're a graduate student, all the way up to the wonderful glory days of the RO1. So these are different tracks you can follow. Some of you have already mentioned F awards. Some of you have had support for a doctoral dissertation, for example. You can also get a K award. You can get an RO3, which is mentioned here today, an R21, or you can even just skip directly from getting your PhD to applying for an RO1. Now, there are a number of reasons why those intervening paths are important. I'm going to assume that ultimately everybody wants an RO1. That's why that's the goal. That's at the end of the pathway. But there are different ways of getting there. So you can go one way or another way, depending upon what your goals are, where you are, and what kinds of limitations and facilitations are available to you. So there are several different types of grants, and I'm going to mention specifically K awards and RO3 awards, because for people who are just beginning to get a start in research, working for the RO1 may not be the best route. As you all know, RO1s are not easy to get. The pay line is very, very difficult to reach, and there are lots of people who submit an RO1 and they come back with that dreaded NS, not scored. They were triaged. They weren't even in the game. So then they have to amend. There will be greater opportunities by going to other kinds of grants, including K awards and RO3 awards. Now, notice for the K award, typical duration 3 to 5 years, depending upon what the K award is, and they pay up to $150,000 a year. And you'll hear more from Dr. Sclair on this later today. The RO3 award gives you funding for 2 years, up to $50K. It gives you a chance to get your foot in the door. It gives you a chance to say, yes, I am a funded NIH investigator. It gives you money. It helps you to tell your department or your institution, I am a funded investigator. I earned some money. May not be big, but I've got to start. And it indicates that people thought well enough of my research that they said, yes, we're going to give you some money. This is very important because if we look at the average age of the PhD getting an RO1 or RO1 equivalent award today, it's 42 years of age. According to some research, 42 years of age is when the brain begins to shrink, which is an unfortunate coincidence. But in any case, notice that it's not until the age of 42 that many people have for the first time an RO1 degree. So they've been sitting around in some faculty position or research position for a long time waiting for this big RO1. Well, that's really a long time. So NIH has helped They're aware of this problem. They want to make sure that younger investigators are able to do the work they want to do. They want to get in the laboratory, and they need support for it. So that's why we have those kinds of awards. Now, here's some data on the K Award. The Research Career Development Awards gives you some idea of the average size of the grant, and you can see how the numbers of these have increased, and you can see that that's a good deal better than the RO3, which is, after all, capped at $50,000 a year. It's not a lot of money to undertake a research program. There are other reasons to be interested in the K Award. Let's look at success rates. Now, these data are a little bit hard to get. These are data from NIH, and these are NIH success rates for selected K activities, especially the K08 and the K23. And I won't take time to detail those now. You'll hear more about those later. But notice that the success rates are generally above 30% for those, long-term average going from 1996 up until about 2010, the most recent data that were reported by this particular agency. Now, if you compare that with RO1s, now getting the pay line for RO1s is not easy because a lot of the member institutes do not share their pay lines. Some of them do. For those who did, I calculated an average, and it turned out to be about 11%, which at least until very recently was the estimated pay line for NIDCD RO1s this year. I guess it's gone up somewhat since that time. But the idea is, when you're asking where should I submit, think not only about the type of grant, try to get some data on pay lines. It makes sense. If you're going to play the lottery, you might as well go where the odds are with you. Now, notice the odds are better if you're submitting a K Award than if you're submitting an RO1. K Awards have other virtues that you're going to hear about. They can provide lots of good mentoring opportunities and can be a very effective bridge into certain types of clinical research. So think carefully about those kinds of options. Oh, time switch and person switch. Dr. Snide. When Willie Sutton was asked, why do you rob banks? He said, because that's where the money is. Why submit grant applications to NIH? Because that's where the money is. Why submit RO1s? Because that's where the money is. If you submit an RO3, you're going to get how much money? $50,000 for how many years? 2 years? Come on! What's that going to do for you? Unless you got some huge startup package, which we'll talk about later, $50,000 a year is not going to pay for much of anything. If you have anything that's demanding in terms of resources, if you need consumables, if you need to pay for research participants, if you need to pay part of an imaging facility, if you need to do anything, $50,000 is going to go very, very quickly. Yeah, it's good to have on your CV, but what does it really buy you in terms of building a research program? And also think, 2 years. If you want to submit an RO1 application and you're thinking the RO3 is the bridge to an RO1, by the time you get your RO3 rolling and you collect your first preliminary data, you want to be writing your RO1. In other words, there's no time. No time really to take benefit of the RO3. What will likely happen is you'll plug away on the RO3, living on a shoestring, finish your 2 years, and then you have to have a hiatus while you plan to submit your RO1. So you've just lost 2 years of your tenure track life sitting on an RO3 application. Does that make sense? Let's consider by the numbers. The average age of the PhD graduate is 34. The mean age of receiving tenure in the United States is 39. The mean age of receiving the first RO1 equivalent research award is 42. And as I mentioned, this is about the time that the brain begins to shrink, and then we finally retire at age 65. Notice that there's a lot of stuff that happens during these 30s and 40s. That's when people are really hitting the road. And it's a changed situation. It was not always like this. This slide I got from NIH. This I call the graying of the RO1 PI. Notice back in 1980s, that's the leftmost distribution, kind of the light blue color, bluish gray. Notice that at that time, it looks like the modal age of the RO1 PI was, less than 40? Notice we had a lot of 30-year-olds. But notice what happened as we get to 2010. The whole thing shifts. We've got a demographic shift. And now our RO1 PIs are getting older. The good side is There are some guys in their 75, some men and women in their 75th year who are still PIs on RO1s. The sad part of the story is, notice what's happened to our people less than 35. They're almost invisible. So we're seeing this entire shift. So that's why NIH is concerned. That's why they give you things like the RO3. That's just a sop. It's to say, we feel sorry for you, and we're going to try to give you a little bit of research money so you'll be encouraged and you won't give up research. That's nice of them, but it's not real money, is it? This gives you an idea of what happens with RO1s. You can get these data from NIH. And this shows you the percent of unsolicited type RO1 research grants that were funded. So these are field initiated, as most of them are. And you can see if you have a really high percentile score to the left of the slide there, some of those are funded right off the bat. As the priority score goes down all the way to 50 to the extreme right, notice that there's very little in the way of funding possibility, even with the first and second amended application. So if you get a very low score, bear in mind the odds are really against you of ever getting funded, no matter how much you amend it. And there are various reasons for this, but just be aware. When you get a bad score on an RO1, think carefully about whether you should amend it or whether you should redirect and maybe find another topic.